You know that eerie silence that creeps into your home when something's not quite right? Not the comforting quiet of late-night peace, but the kind that whispers something's changing. That's how it started. Slowly, subtly, like a fog seeping in through the cracks. Madison used to laugh in the mornings. Full belly laughs, not the polite kind. I used to wake up to her humming in the kitchen, barefoot in my shirt, making coffee like it was an act of love. Lately, I woke up alone. Coffee brewed on a timer. A post-it note on the fridge. Late night at work, don't wait up. At first, I believed it. She was in marketing, deadlines, late presentations, client dinners. But then the perfume started to linger. That perfume. Musky jasmine with a bite of sandalwood. It wasn't her usual scent, and it stayed in the air long after she left. Sometimes, I caught a whiff in our sheets even though we hadn't had sex in weeks. And the texts? They shifted too. From hearts and emojis to cold, utilitarian pings. Need anything? I'll be late. Don't forget to feed Loki. That was our cat. The one she insisted we adopt together to practice being parents. Now, she barely acknowledged him, or me. We used to have rituals, Taco Tuesdays, weekend hikes, spontaneous kitchen sex when we were drunk on wine and music. Now, dinner was eaten in silence. She sat across from me like a ghost of the woman I married, scrolling on her phone, only half listening when I spoke. I started to wonder if I had become invisible, or worse, boring. But not everyone seemed to think so. Grace lived upstairs, Madison's best friend, a recent divorcee with a wicked laugh, an obsession with red wine, and eyes that lingered a little too long when she caught me shirtless on laundry day. She moved in 6 months ago, fresh out of a decade-long marriage to a finance guy who traded her in for someone with fewer laugh lines and bigger breasts. We didn't talk much at first, just hallway hellos and neighborly nods. But Grace had a presence, confident, magnetic. The kind of woman who made sweatpants look sexy and always smelled faintly of vanilla and something warm, like rain on pavement. I caught her glancing at me one night when I was taking the trash out. She leaned against the stairwell railing, glass of wine in hand, and smiled like she knew something I didn't. "Long night?" she asked, her voice low, husky. The kind of voice that made you forget your wife hadn't kissed you goodnight in a month. I nodded, offering a weak smile. Too many of those lately. She tilted her head, assessing me in that way women do when they already know the answer but want to hear you say it anyway. "She working late again?" "Yeah," I said, trying not to sound bitter. Big campaign pitch. Grace sipped her wine and arched a brow. Of course." She didn't say more, but she didn't need to. That look, that mix of empathy and curiosity, said plenty. After that, I started noticing her more. The way her laugh echoed through the building. The soft thump of her footsteps overhead. The occasional scent of her cooking drifting down through the vents. Garlic, rosemary, something roasted and tender. Meals meant for one. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining her up there, wrapped in a blanket, legs tucked under her, wine glass in hand, reading some moody novel by candlelight. I'd wonder if she thought of me, the way I had started to think of her. And all the while, Madison was slipping further away. Sex became a memory, a quiet ache I couldn't quite soothe. I'd roll over in bed and feel nothing but cold sheets and the faint buzz of her phone lighting up in the dark. Once, I caught a glimpse of a message. A name I didn't recognize. A single red heart emoji. She locked the screen before I could read more. I didn't ask. I couldn't. I told myself it was probably a client. Or a friend. Or maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what it looked like. Still, I stayed. I kept making dinner. I cleaned the house. I folded her laundry and left fresh towels on the rack. I kissed her cheek each morning even when her lips barely moved. Because that's what love does, right? It waits. It holds on, even when it's being dragged through glass. But the truth? I was starving. Not just for sex. For attention. For warmth. For someone to see me. To want me. That's when Grace started showing up more. "Forgot to grab eggs," she'd say, standing in the doorway in shorts that should have been illegal. "Mind if I borrow some?" Or, "Can you help me move this shelf?" And once, I made too much pasta. "You hungry?" It always started innocent. But there was always something there. An extra beat. A flicker in her gaze. A smirk that hinted at something unsaid. I'd feel it. A pulse in my throat. Heat behind my eyes. I knew the danger. I knew the line. But when your bed is cold and your wife's touch is a memory, Temptation starts to feel like relief. One night, I heard them laughing. Madison and Grace. Upstairs. The first laugh I'd heard from Madison in weeks. They were drinking. Probably wine. Probably reminiscing. I sat downstairs, staring at the blank TV screen, wondering what they were saying. Had Grace told her how tired I looked? Did Madison confess anything? Or were they both laughing at the man downstairs, slowly unraveling while pretending everything was fine? I didn't sleep that night. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps, listening for signs of life or betrayal. The nights were getting longer and colder, and something was about to break. The storm rolled in like something biblical. Thick gray clouds blanketed the sky, dragging daylight into early dusk. I had just shut down my laptop, another night working late for a job I wasn't passionate about, when the first clap of thunder rattled the window panes. Madison was, of course, still at the office. Her last text had come 2 hours ago, working late. Don't wait up. XO. The power flicked off just before 7. 1 second the living room was bathed in soft yellow lamplight. The next it was swallowed by shadow. I stood there for a moment, blinking at my dark reflection in the blank TV screen, then sighed and walked to the kitchen. Fumbling for the drawer where we kept flashlights, I found only dead batteries and half-melted tea lights. Figures. I was still cursing under my breath when the knock came. 3 quick taps. Familiar. Confident. I opened the door to find Grace standing there, wrapped in a gray hoodie and holding a candle in one hand, a bottle of red wine in the other. Her hair was loose, damp from the rain, sticking slightly to her collarbone. There was something about the way she stood, relaxed, centered, like she belonged there, that made me forget what I was about to say. Figured you could use company, she said, flashing a warm smile. No power upstairs either. I opened the door wider without thinking. You read my mind. She stepped in and kicked off her shoes, water pooling slightly on the doormat. Her perfume, subtle, woodsy, not like Madison's sharp florals, mixed with the scent of rain and wax. She set the candle on the coffee table, lit it with a match from her hoodie pocket, and sank into the couch like it was a ritual. I brought the good stuff, she said, wiggling the bottle. No corkscrew, I said, suddenly embarrassed at how unprepared I was. Ours is somewhere. Maybe in a box in the garage. Grace grinned and pulled one from her pocket. Come on, Tyler. Give me some credit. She poured us 2 glasses and held hers up. The candlelight flickered across her face, casting shadows that made her cheekbones look sharper, her eyes darker. To power outages, she said, an unexpected company. I raised my glass, clinked hers, and took a sip. The wine was bold, dry, and smooth. She tucked one leg underneath her, angled toward me. I sat across from her, our knees only inches apart. I always like the quiet during storms, she said after a moment. When the world shuts off and you're left with nothing but your own thoughts. Yeah, I said. Harder to ignore things that way. Her eyes flicked to mine. Like what? I hesitated. Like how empty the house feels when she's not here. Or when she is, but not really. Grace didn't respond right away. She sipped her wine and looked at me like she already knew the rest of the story. You ever talk to her about it? I tried, I said. Lately it feels like everything I say gets filtered, like she's already decided how she wants the conversation to go. Grace nodded. That sounds exhausting. It is. We sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the rain drum steadily against the windows. Her eyes flicked to the ceiling, then back to me. I hear you pacing sometimes, she said quietly. Late at night. I froze. She smiled gently. Don't worry. I'm not spying. It just carries thin walls. I guess I didn't realize. You sound lonely. There it was, blunt, but not cruel. Just real. No judgment. I wanted to say no. I wanted to pretend I was fine. But something in her tone stripped away the lies I'd been telling myself for weeks. Yeah, I said. I am. She nodded, like she understood that kind of emptiness. I was married, you know. I know. 2 years ago. Caught him in our bed. With someone I thought was a friend. Her voice didn't crack, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Some nights I still wake up thinking I hear him in the kitchen. Muscle memory. Grief has its own echo. I swallowed. I'm sorry. Grace leaned back against the couch, pulling the sleeves of her hoodie over her hands. Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me. Painful as hell, but it woke me up. To what? To what I deserve. The room went quiet again. The storm outside raged louder now, wind howling, rain pelting the windows. The candle flickered between us, casting a golden glow across her skin. I watched her mouth as she took another sip of wine. The way her lips parted, the slight indent her bottom lip made against the glass. I hadn't noticed a woman's mouth like that in months. Maybe longer. Grace caught me watching and tilted her head. What? Nothing, I said too quickly. She set her wine down. It's okay, you know, to miss being touched. I let out a soft breath. It's not just the sex. It's feeling seen, wanted, like I still matter to someone. Grace leaned forward slightly, her knee brushing mine. You do matter, Tyler. Don't let her make you feel small. That touch, the casual, unhurried press of her leg against mine, sent a quiet heat through my body. Not urgent, not wild, just alive. Something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I started, not finishing the sentence. She gave a small smile. Yeah, me too. Neither of us moved right away. The rain softened. Somewhere outside, a branch cracked and fell. Then, with a low click and a hum, the power returned. The lights flicked on. The refrigerator buzzed to life. The quiet was gone, but the silence between us stayed charged. Grace stood slowly. Thanks for the wine, she said. And the company. You brought both. She smirked. Still, it was nice. We walked to the door together. She lingered for a beat before stepping into the hall. Then, just as she turned away, she looked over her shoulder. Good night, Tyler. Her voice was softer than usual. Almost a whisper. A secret just for me. Night, I said, the word catching on my tongue. The door clicked shut behind her. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. The next morning, I woke up thinking about her. Not my wife, Grace. Not in any inappropriate way. Not exactly. Just a loop in my head of her voice, saying, you matter. The way her knee had rested gently against mine. The way candlelight shimmered off the curve of her lips. I lay in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling like it might offer clarity. But all I found were the same questions I'd been asking for weeks, only now with new variables I didn't understand. When I finally went downstairs, the house was quiet. Madison's side of the bed was cold, her pillow untouched. She must have gotten up before dawn. A text waited on my phone. Early meeting. Don't forget the trash bins. Love you. That last part. Love you. It looked like a signature, not a sentiment. I made coffee and drank it in silence, standing by the kitchen window, watching the street come alive. Grace's car was still in the driveway. I wondered if she was awake. I wondered if she was thinking about last night, too. The day crawled. I tried to work, but couldn't focus. Everything I did felt mechanical, like I was just moving through motions, ticking boxes. Around 3, I heard her footsteps upstairs. Light and rhythmic. I paused, listened. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a door creaking open, a knock on the wall, anything that would make it easier to justify walking up there. But nothing came. By evening, Madison had texted again. Sorry, babe. Working through dinner. Don't wait up. Might be really late. The babe part almost made me laugh. It sounded recycled, like she was throwing scraps of intimacy to see if I'd still bite. I stared at her message for a full minute before deleting it without replying. And then, without fully realizing why, I grabbed the bag of sugar from the pantry and walked upstairs. Her door was slightly open. I knocked anyway. Grace. She opened it within seconds. She was barefoot, hair tied up in a messy knot, wearing a long t-shirt with soft-looking fabric that clung to her in ways that made my throat go dry. She smiled when she saw me. Well, if it isn't the sugar man. I held up the bag. Thought I'd return the favor. You needed an excuse to see me, huh? She teased, stepping back to let me in. I smiled. Maybe. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon and something faintly floral. Candles again. She always had a way of making a space feel like it belonged in some indie romance film. Quiet lighting, soft throw blankets. Art on the walls that felt like it had stories behind it. She took the sugar and set it on the counter. You want coffee? Or wine? I hesitated. You drinking already? After a day of freelance editing garbage ebooks about billionaire werewolves? Yes. Yes, I am. I laughed. Wine, then. She poured 2 glasses and leaned against the counter. So, she said, eyes locking onto mine. You okay? I didn't answer right away. I was too busy noticing how the neckline of her shirt dipped just slightly when she leaned forward. Too busy remembering how it had felt to be touched, even casually, after so many weeks of nothing. I don't know, I said finally. I don't know what this is anymore. Madison and I can't remember the last time I felt like we were on the same page, or even in the same book. Grace nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Have you ever cheated? The question came out of nowhere. It hung between us like static. No, I said. Never. She tilted her head. Thought about it. I looked down into my glass. Lately. Ever. Lately, I repeated. There was a beat of silence. Then she walked to the window, pulling aside the curtain just enough to peer into the street below. The way her shirt shifted when she moved made it impossible not to look. Her legs were bare. Her skin, smooth and pale in the soft lighting, pulled at something inside me I hadn't felt in months. I warned her, you know, Grace said quietly. Madison. A long time ago. I frowned. Warned her. She used to talk about you like you were her puppy. Devoted. Predictable. She'd laugh about how she could disappear for hours and you'd still be there when she came back. Grace turned toward me, her eyes sharp. I told her people like you don't stay loyal when they're invisible. I set my wine down. You told her that? She said it didn't matter. That marriage gets boring. That men always forgive if you give them just enough affection to keep them guessing. A flush of heat crept up my neck. I didn't know whether it was anger, humiliation, or something more dangerous. And now, I asked, what do you think? Grace stepped closer, stopping just in front of me. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I think she doesn't see you, but I do. Her fingers reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. The touch was feather-light, but it landed like a punch to the gut. My hands itched to reach for her, but I held still, my mind a mess of conflict and craving. You shouldn't say that, I said, my voice barely audible. Why not? She whispered. Because it's true? My breath hitched. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, the space between us felt impossibly small. Then she stepped back, just an inch, just enough to pull the tension taut. Relax, Tyler, she said with a soft smile, as if she hadn't just set fire to the air between us. I'm not going to kiss you. I stared at her, heart hammering, unsure whether I was relieved or disappointed. Next time, she added, turning back toward the kitchen. I left a few minutes later. We didn't touch again. We didn't have to. Her voice echoed in my head the whole walk down the stairs. I see you. It started with a text. A short, quiet pulse of light in the dark. Grace, still can't sleep. Want to come up? I sat at the kitchen table with a half-empty beer. The only sound the soft were of the refrigerator. Madison had texted an hour ago. Madison, late again. Don't wait up. You're amazing. I'm sorry I've been distant. It almost sounded sincere. Almost. But it was the same message as always, a line thrown into the void, hoping it would be enough to keep me loyal without requiring anything from her in return. I looked at Grace's message again. Simple. Honest. Not demanding. Just there, like she always seemed to be lately. I stared at the phone for another minute, then stood. The walk up the stairs was slower than it needed to be. My hand hovered near her door before I knocked twice, soft, like I was trying not to admit I was really there. It opened before the second knock faded. The room smelled like vanilla and rain. A single candle glowed from her coffee table, and soft music, something acoustic and slow, drifted through a speaker on the shelf. Grace stood in the middle of the room barefoot, wearing one of Madison's old sweaters, oversized and hanging loosely off one shoulder. I recognized it instantly. The soft gray one Madison used to wear when she curled up with me on movie nights. Back when we still had movie nights. Somehow, it didn't hurt seeing it on Grace. It felt right. I didn't think you'd come, she said, her voice a little quieter than usual. I almost didn't, I replied. She didn't ask why. She just nodded like she understood. I stepped inside. She closed the door behind me, but didn't lock it. The candlelight flickered against the windows as thunder rolled distantly, like the storm from days ago hadn't quite left either of us. I wasn't sure what I'd come for. Maybe just company. Maybe not. I didn't know how to name it yet, only that I was tired of being alone in my own house, of sitting beside a woman who didn't even notice me anymore. Wine? She offered. I shook my head. No, just this is fine. She sat cross-legged on the edge of the couch and waited for me to do the same. I did, not too close, not too far. We sat like that for a few beats, listening to the low hum of the music and the occasional creak of the building settling. I used to envy you too, Grace said suddenly. I turned to her. What do you mean? Back when Madison and I first became friends. You were always so steady. She made you sound boring sometimes, dependable, predictable, but I saw how you looked at her. You made her feel safe. She never really understood what that was worth. She did, once, I murmured. Or at least, she said she did. Grace looked down, her fingers playing with a loose thread on the sweater's sleeve. She stopped telling me about you a while ago. That's when I figured things had shifted. Yeah, I said. They did. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, waiting. She looked up. And now? I hesitated. Now I'm still here. Still trying to figure out if I'm staying because I believe she'll come back, or because I'm afraid to admit she already left. Grace didn't respond right away. She just studied me. Really looked like she was peeling back the layers I'd been hiding behind. You deserve someone who chooses you, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Not just tolerates you. It hit deeper than I expected. Maybe because I hadn't said it out loud myself yet. Maybe because it was the first time someone else had acknowledged what I hadn't dared face. I exhaled slowly. I don't know if I'm the man I used to be. She smiled, a soft, sad smile that didn't try to fix me, just saw me. Maybe not, she said. But maybe you're someone new. Someone braver. I turned toward her. Our knees brushed. She didn't move away. I watched her face. The way her mouth parted slightly when she exhaled. The way her eyes searched mine like she was waiting for a sign. Her hand was on her lap, palm up. Open. Unspoken permission. And then she said it. Kiss me. Just 2 words. Quiet. Certain. No game in them. No manipulation. Just truth. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I did. Because everything was tilting, and I knew once I crossed this line, it wouldn't be temporary. This wasn't a release. It was a choice. A point of no return. She didn't look away, and I didn't pretend to be stronger than I was. I leaned in slowly, letting the tension stretch, letting the space between us heat like wire beneath current. Our foreheads touched first, then our noses. Then, finally, our mouths met in a kiss that wasn't rushed or hungry, but deep and deliberate. An acknowledgement. Her lips were soft, warm, patient. She kissed like she'd been waiting. Not just for me, but for something real. Something that didn't need to be stolen in the dark. My hand cupped her jaw, thumb brushing her cheek. Her fingers threaded into my hair, pulling me closer, like she needed the weight of me to remind her she was still here, still wanted. We broke apart slowly, both of us breathing harder, hearts racing in unison. Neither of us spoke. There was no apology, no promise, just silence and understanding. We sat like that for a long time, knees touching, shoulders leaning in, the candlelight dancing between us as if even it knew something had shifted. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't try to stop me, but she didn't look away either. Her eyes followed me to the door, and just before I opened it, she said, "Next time, you don't have to go." I turned, met her gaze, and nodded. I know. Then I stepped into the hallway, and back into a life I no longer recognized. We told ourselves it was a mistake. The next morning, I didn't even need to say it. I could see it in Grace's eyes when I passed her on the stairs. No playful smirk, no subtle touches, just a brief glance, a nod, and the kind of silence that follows a storm when everyone's too scared to speak. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment, a fluke, a lapse, but the lie didn't stick. I replayed it constantly, her breath against my skin, the way her lips had trembled just slightly before they met mine. It hadn't felt like a mistake. It had felt like a beginning. But beginnings, in my life lately, came dressed in endings. Madison still hadn't asked if I was okay. Still hadn't noticed the way I barely looked at her anymore, or how I stayed late at work just to avoid eating at the same table. When she did make it home in time for dinner, she sat across from me like a stranger. That Friday, she canceled date night again, the 4th one in a row. Sorry, babe. Last-minute campaign strategy meeting. You know how it is. No apology voice, no makeup calls. Just a digital shrug and silence. So that night, instead of a dinner table filled with awkward silence, I found myself walking up the stairs again. I didn't knock this time. Grace opened the door before I touched it, like she'd been waiting. Neither of us said a word. She stepped aside, and I walked in. That night, we didn't kiss. We didn't even touch. We just sat close, our shoulders barely brushing, sharing a glass of red and listening to music that neither of us paid much attention to. "I missed this," she said softly. Just having someone to sit with who doesn't want anything except me. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because I knew exactly what she meant, and I was afraid of how much I meant it too. The affair didn't start in a bed. It started in those spaces in between, in the glances that lingered a second too long, the gentle jokes that hit deeper than they should have. It started in the morning texts and the coffee runs, the stolen laughter, and the secrets folded into quiet hallways. And I let it happen. I started going up more often. At first, just every few days. Then almost every day. I'd bring excuses with me. Coffee, a leftover muffin, a question about her TV remote, and leave without them. She never asked me to stay. I never asked if I could. We just stopped pretending we weren't orbiting each other. One morning, I brought her an extra croissant and set it on her windowsill, knocking lightly. She was still in pajamas, hair wild from sleep, eyes heavy but amused. "You bribing me with pastries now?" she asked. I shrugged. Seemed easier than saying I missed you. Her eyes softened. "You really need to stop saying things like that." "Why?" "Because I don't want to stop hearing them." We stood there for a beat too long, and then she reached out, fingers grazing mine as she took the croissant from my hand. Just a touch, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten, enough to make my knees a little less steady. Later that day, she told me something I hadn't expected. "I warned her, you know." "Madison?" "Yeah." Grace stared out her window. "A year ago, maybe more. I told her she was pushing you away, that she was playing with fire." I turned to her. "Why would you do that?" "Because I saw it then. What she didn't. That you deserved more than the scraps she was giving you." "She didn't listen?" "She said you'd never leave her. That you didn't have it in you." That hit harder than I wanted to admit. Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't have it in me to leave. Maybe that's why I was hiding upstairs, in another woman's apartment, instead of in my own marriage. Grace must have seen something shift in my expression, because she touched my arm lightly. "I didn't tell you that to hurt you. I know. I just want you to know, this isn't just revenge. Or loneliness. At least, not for me." I looked at her. "What is it then?" She hesitated, then said the one thing I wasn't ready for. "Hope." I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure I had any of that left. 2 nights later, Madison came home early. I was sitting on the couch, watching something I wasn't really watching, when I heard the key turn. She stepped inside looking tired, but less tense than usual, like maybe her late nights had finally paid off in some professional win. "Hey," she said. "You're home." "Yeah." She hesitated. "Dinner." I ate. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine, and stood behind the couch. "We haven't really talked much," she said, her tone cautious. "No," I replied, still staring ahead. She didn't sit, just hovered. "Is everything okay?" I turned slowly, meeting her eyes for the first time in days. "You tell me." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. Then, after a beat, "I've been figuring some things out. About myself." I waited. She looked down. "I think I might have feelings for someone at work." My throat closed. She said it so quietly, like the words might vanish if she didn't look directly at them. I didn't shout. I didn't ask who. I didn't cry. I just stared at her and said, "Thank you for finally telling me." That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I went upstairs. Grace opened the door, already knowing. "She told you," she said. I nodded. And then, without asking, I stepped forward, wrapped my arms around her, and let her hold all the pieces Madison had dropped. Her hands found the back of my neck, her breath against my skin. "Then let me love you the way she won't," she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like the truth. I woke in Grace's bed before the sun did. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. The sheets smelled like vanilla and her skin. The room was warmer than my own, softer somehow, like it didn't expect anything from me except to just be. Grace was still asleep beside me, one arm draped lazily across my stomach. Her breath moved in quiet rhythms against my shoulder, and for the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight when I opened my eyes. But reality didn't take long to catch up. I slipped out of bed quietly, pulled on my jeans, and moved through her apartment like I belonged there, which scared me more than I could admit. Downstairs, the house was still dark. Madison's shoes were in the foyer. Her bag was dropped on the chair. A half-empty wine glass sat on the counter like a peace offering she forgot to finish. I stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long time, trying to decide if I should lie, pretend I'd slept on the couch, Pretend none of this was real. Instead, I made coffee. She came down 20 minutes later, still in her robe, hair tousled. When she saw me, she paused, eyes flicking toward the stairs, then back to me. "You were gone last night," she said. I nodded. "I know." She didn't ask where. She just sat down at the kitchen island and waited while I poured her a cup. "I thought we were going to talk," she said. "You did talk," I replied. I listened. Madison wrapped her fingers around the mug and stared into it like it might tell her what to say. "What I said, it wasn't meant to hurt you." "But it did," I said, not with anger, just certainty. She looked up. Her eyes were tired. Not just from lack of sleep. Tired in that soul-deep way people get when they've been pretending too long. "I don't even know how it started," she whispered. "I think I was just bored, or numb, or scared that this, us, was all there was." I leaned back against the counter. "Was that such a bad thing?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe I thought love was supposed to feel bigger, wilder. And you were always so steady. So good." The way she said good made it sound like a flaw. I didn't speak. I just let her keep going. "I didn't sleep with him," she said suddenly, too quickly. "Not yet. I mean, it was heading there, I guess. But I stopped it." "Why?" I asked. Her voice cracked. "Because I knew once I crossed that line, I couldn't pretend anymore. And I was still hoping I could fix this." I looked at her for a long time. "You told me you had feelings for someone else. That was crossing the line." She flinched, then nodded. "I know." I sat across from her, letting the silence settle between us. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. "Months ago, when things started falling apart." She hesitated. "Because I didn't think you'd understand. That you were unhappy?" "That I didn't know why I was," she admitted. "I kept waiting for you to do something. To notice. To fight for me." "I was fighting," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Every day. In every quiet way I knew how. I showed up, Madison. I was here. I was always here." She blinked hard. "I know. And I think that scared me more than if you had left." We sat there for a long time. Two people tethered to something neither of us knew how to name anymore. The version of us that used to exist had long since collapsed, and we'd both been pretending it hadn't. Finally, I stood. "I need to get out of the house for a bit." She looked up. To her. I didn't deny it. I just looked her in the eye. To someone who sees me. She looked like she wanted to cry, but didn't. She just nodded, lips pressed into a tight line. "Do you love her?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I know what I feel when I'm with her isn't confusion." She didn't follow me to the door. Didn't ask when I'd be back. And that silence told me more than any answer could. Grace didn't ask questions when I showed up. She didn't need to. She just opened the door, reached for my hand, and pulled me inside. We sat on her couch for hours, not touching, not talking much, just letting the quiet do what words couldn't. When I finally told her what Madison said, she just nodded. "She's unraveling," Grace said. "People always do when the illusion breaks." She said she was scared of our life becoming too comfortable. Grace scoffed. "Isn't that the point? Building something stable?" "She wanted wild," I said. Grace looked at me. "And what do you want?" I didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "I want to be wanted. Not just needed. Not tolerated. Chosen." She reached for my hand, her thumb grazing my knuckles. "You are." I looked at her. "Are we making a mistake?" Grace's expression softened. "Maybe. But it doesn't feel like one." And it didn't. Not in that room. Not with her. That night, we didn't kiss. We didn't fall into bed. We just held each other, wrapped in something warm and quiet, something that felt like home. And I realized then, love doesn't always show up with fireworks and passion. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the form of someone who stays. The days blurred into each other after Madison's confession. We didn't talk much. We didn't fight. We just coexisted. Like two strangers bound by a lease and old photographs. She stayed later at work. I started waking up in Grace's apartment more often than my own. And neither of us pretended we didn't notice. There was no dramatic fallout, no slammed doors. Just a slow, quiet unraveling, like threads being pulled from opposite ends of a fraying rope. It should have felt like a disaster. But instead, it felt like relief. Grace and I never said what we were. We didn't label anything. We just let it happen. I'd show up with breakfast. She'd hand me a coffee before I knocked. I'd cook her dinner and stay until the candles burned low. Once, I caught her wearing one of my old hoodies when she thought I wasn't looking. I didn't say anything. I just watched her laugh at something on her phone and felt a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. One morning, we made pancakes. No hiding. No whispers. Her windows were open, music low, sunlight pouring across the countertops. She moved around the kitchen barefoot, in one of my t-shirts, flipping pancakes like it was the most natural thing in the world. I leaned against the doorway, sipping my coffee, watching her dance a little to the music. She caught me staring. "What?" she asked, smiling. I shook my head. "Nothing. Just, this feels dangerous." She walked over, slid her arms around my waist. "Good dangerous?" I wrapped my hands around hers. "Too good." She kissed my shoulder. "Let them talk." And they did. It started small. Mrs. Henley downstairs asking why she kept hearing footsteps upstairs late at night, or why she saw me carrying groceries to the wrong door. Then the couple across the hall who gave me a longer than usual glance when Grace hugged me on the landing. Even the mailman raised an eyebrow one morning when he handed me a package labeled with Grace's name. I guess I should have cared more. I should have been discreet, careful. But the truth was, something inside me wanted to be seen. Not because I wanted to hurt Madison, but because I was tired of hiding like the guilty one. Besides, Madison had changed too. She moved like someone who had already made peace with something. Calm, detached. She still smiled when we crossed paths in the kitchen, still made coffee for two even when she knew I wouldn't drink it. And one morning, as I stood by the sink rinsing my plate, she looked at me and said, "You seem happier." I turned slowly, unsure if it was a trap. "Do I?" She nodded, sipped her coffee. "You laugh more. Sleep better. You don't flinch when I walk into the room." "What are you saying?" She shrugged. "Just an observation." And then, before I could respond, she added, "Maybe I'm not the only one who's been keeping secrets." The words hit hard, not because they were wrong, but because of how right they sounded in her voice. Like she'd been waiting to say them for weeks. She didn't press. She didn't accuse. She just walked away, leaving me in a kitchen that suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. That night, I told Grace everything. We were curled up on her couch, the windows fogged from the cold outside. Her head was resting on my chest, and my fingers were tracing lazy circles along her arm. "She knows," I said. Grace didn't even flinch. "Yeah, I figured." She didn't accuse me. She just implied. Grace sat up, turned to face me. "You think she's waiting for a confession?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe she's daring me to deny it." Grace tucked her legs under her. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think she doesn't care. I think she made her choice weeks ago. And now she's watching to see what you'll do with yours." I stared at her. "You really believe that?" Grace hesitated. "I think people know when they've lost something, even if they won't admit it." There was a long pause. "She asked me this morning if I was happier," I said. "And what did you say?" I didn't answer. Grace leaned closer. "Well," I met her eyes. "Yeah, I'm happier." She smiled. Not the mischievous grin she used when teasing, but something softer. "Sadder, maybe." "So what now?" "I don't know." "Are you going back to her?" The question landed like a weight in my stomach. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. "I think I already left," I said. Grace nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time we stopped hiding." But that was the thing. We weren't really hiding anymore. And maybe we never were. Maybe Madison knew long before I did that my heart had already left the room. Maybe Grace did too. The next morning, I was walking to the lobby when I heard someone behind me. "Morning," Madison said, calm as ever. I turned, surprised to see her in jeans and a sweater, casual, comfortable. Not the power suits she usually wore on weekdays. "You're home?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Took the day off." "Everything okay?" "I just needed a reset." We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then, casually, she said, "I invited Grace for dinner tonight." The words didn't register at first. "What? Dinner? Here? Just the three of us?" I stared at her. "Why?" Madison tilted her head, studied my face. "Because it's time, don't you think?" There was something in her eyes, not anger, not even hurt, just certainty, like a final move in a game she'd already won. And in that moment, I knew what was coming wasn't a dinner. It was a reckoning. Dinner with my wife and the woman I was falling for. It sounded like the opening line of a bad joke. Except it wasn't funny. It was real. And it was happening at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. Madison didn't elaborate after dropping the bombshell that morning. Just a casual, "I invited Grace for dinner." like she was asking me to pass the salt. No explanation, no demand, just certainty in her voice, like she already knew how it would go. I considered warning Grace, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the look in Madison's eyes. Not anger, not jealousy, but something colder. Composed. I didn't want to give Grace a reason to run or worry. Part of me hoped maybe it really was just dinner. Maybe, against all odds, we were adults enough to sit at the same table and pretend the house wasn't already a battleground. I should have known better. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Grace stood in the entryway with a bottle of wine in one hand and the faintest trace of a nervous smile. She wore a simple black dress, not flashy, not understated, just enough to say I showed up. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders, and her eyes searched mine the second the door opened. "You okay?" she whispered as I stepped aside to let her in. "No," I said, "but I'm here." She gave a soft nod and stepped inside. Madison was already in the dining room, setting the table with the kind of care that made everything feel more like a performance than a meal. Candlelight flickered across the plates. The food smelled amazing: roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, sautéed greens. She hadn't cooked like this in months. "Grace," Madison said warmly, crossing the room with a kiss to her cheek. "I'm so glad you came." Grace offered her the wine. "Thanks for the invite." "Of course. It's been too long," Madison said, as if they were just old friends catching up, as if nothing between us had changed. We sat. Madison poured wine, made polite conversation, asked Grace about work, about her recent trip to Seattle, about the weather. It was surreal, like I was watching someone else play my wife. Grace was composed, but her fingers stayed curled around the stem of her glass. She answered every question carefully, never once looking at me for too long, never giving away what Madison already knew. And I knew Madison knew. It wasn't just intuition anymore. It was the way her eyes lingered, the way she smiled just a second too long after asking something innocuous. "So, Grace," she said between bites, "have you been seeing anyone lately?" Grace's fork paused just slightly over her plate. "Nothing serious." "Anyone I know?" The air in the room snapped tight. "No," Grace said quietly. "Nothing worth mentioning." Madison smiled. "I see." We ate in silence for a few minutes. The scraping of forks on plates sounded deafening. And then Madison turned to me. "Tyler, don't you think it's strange how quiet things have gotten between us lately?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I do." She sipped her wine, then set the glass down. "You've changed. You don't even try to hide it anymore." I glanced at Grace, who sat perfectly still, her eyes locked on her plate. "I tried," I said. "I really did." Madison nodded, like she expected that answer. "I used to wonder how long you'd wait. How long you'd keep trying before you looked somewhere else." "Is that what this is?" I asked. "Some kind of test?" "I think I just needed to know if I was right about you," she said, her tone too calm. "About us." Grace stood suddenly. "I think I should go?" "No," Madison said, not sharply, but with enough weight to stop her. "Please, stay. You're part of this too, aren't you?" Grace sat back down slowly. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady now. "I never planned for this," she said. "Neither of us did." "I don't blame you," Madison said, surprisingly sincere. "Honestly, I pushed him away. I created the space. And you filled it." No one spoke. Madison stood, collected the plates without asking. She walked into the kitchen, and I heard the water run. The sound was surreal, like someone calmly doing dishes while the house burned behind her. Grace turned to me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "She knows." "I know," I said. "Why did she invite me?" "To see if I'd flinch," I said. "To see if I'd lie." "And did you?" "No." Madison returned a few minutes later, drying her hands with a towel. "I'm going out of town this weekend," she said casually, not looking at either of us. "Work trip." I nodded. "Okay." She walked past me, paused by the doorway, and then turned slightly. "I won't be checking in." The words landed like a dare. Then she walked away, leaving only the scent of rosemary and wine in the room behind her. Later that night, I stood in Grace's apartment, hands in my pockets, trying to process the wreckage. "She invited me just to watch us squirm," Grace said quietly. "No," I said. "She invited you because she wanted to see if I'd choose you in front of her." Grace turned to me, eyes rimmed red. "Did you?" I walked to her, took her face in my hands. I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I sat there because I wasn't ashamed. She leaned into me, resting her forehead against my chest. It's not supposed to feel this complicated, but it is. She looked up at me. Do you think she's really going away for work? I don't know, I said, but I think she wants me to act like she's not coming back. Grace stepped back, wiped her eyes. And will you? I didn't answer, because I didn't know what Madison wanted anymore. But I knew what I wanted. And for the first time, that felt more dangerous than anything else. Madison left on a Thursday. No suitcase, just a leather carry-on, her laptop, and that calm, unreadable expression she'd mastered so well in the last few weeks. I stood at the door like I always did when she left for business trips. But this time, there was no kiss goodbye, no forced smile. Just silence. As she walked out, she paused, looked over her shoulder, and said, "Take care of yourself, Tyler." She didn't say I love you, didn't ask me to call. And when the door shut behind her, it felt final, like she wasn't just leaving for a few days, like she'd already left. I didn't go upstairs that night. I didn't even move for a long time. I stood in the middle of the living room, the house still and echoing with things we hadn't said. I realized how long it had been since Madison and I shared this space like a real couple. Weeks? Months? Somewhere along the line, we'd stopped being something we could come back to. So when Grace texted, just a simple "You okay?" I didn't reply. I just showed up at her door with a toothbrush and a duffel bag. Her eyebrows rose slightly when she saw me. Is this temporary? I didn't answer. I didn't know. But she stepped aside, let me in, and I unpacked what little I'd brought like it meant something. For the next 2 days, it felt like freedom. We cooked together, slept late, watched movies without pausing to check our phones. I kissed her forehead while she read. She played with my fingers when we lay in bed. Everything that had once felt forbidden now felt real, grounding, safe. But it didn't stay that way. Saturday morning, I was brushing my teeth in her bathroom when her phone lit up on the counter. "Madison, he'll come to you. Be careful what you wish for." The message didn't register at first. I read it twice, then a third time. And then my hands went cold. I walked out slowly, holding the phone like it might explode. Grace was sitting cross-legged on the couch, sipping coffee. She looked up, then froze when she saw my face. "What is it?" she asked. I showed her. She stared at the screen for a long time. Her lips parted, closed, then opened again. "Tyler, I can explain." I sat down hard. "How long has she been texting you?" "A few times. Since that dinner." I didn't reply. "Why would she send you that? What does she mean?" Grace swallowed. She knew. Even before she said it. She knew something was happening between us. I think she wanted confirmation. "Did you give it to her?" "No," she said quickly. "Never. I swear." "Then what does she mean? Be careful what you wish for." Grace looked away. "She thinks I wanted this." My throat tightened. "Did you?" She turned back sharply. "Not like this." "Grace." "I told you, Tyler." I warned her. "I saw what was happening to you. I didn't plan for any of this, but I'm not going to lie and say I didn't want to be near you." I rubbed my hands over my face. "So this was a test? Some sick game between you two?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "But maybe. Maybe it started that way for her. Not me." I stood up. "Jesus, Grace." She grabbed my hand. "I didn't lie to you. I didn't manipulate you. I wanted you to see what it felt like to be loved again." I stared down at her. "And now?" She stood too, closing the distance. "Now I want you to stay. Not because she left. Not because she gave you away. But because you choose me." I looked around her apartment. The blankets on the couch. The half-finished book on the coffee table. The photos on the fridge that I wasn't in. I suddenly felt like I didn't belong anywhere. "I need to think," I said. "Tyler, I just need some air." I stepped out into the hall, then down the stairs 2 at a time. The front door slammed shut behind me harder than I intended. Outside, the sky was gray, a low, bruised ceiling hanging above the neighborhood. The same weather from the night Grace first knocked on my door. Only this time, it wasn't electric. It was heavy, suffocating. I walked without direction, past the coffee shop, past the bookstore where Grace and I once lingered, past the bar Madison and I used to go to every Friday night, back when we still celebrated small things. I ended up at a park, sitting on a damp bench with my elbows on my knees, staring at the ground like it had answers. Had I traded one illusion for another? Madison had known. She'd seen this coming. Maybe she even pushed me toward Grace to confirm something about herself, to justify her own failures. Maybe she wanted me to break first, so she didn't have to carry the weight of guilt. Or maybe she had just given up on us long ago, and I had simply caught up. When I finally went back to Grace's, it was dark. The lights were off. Her door was unlocked. She was on the couch, curled up, eyes puffy. She didn't speak when I entered. Didn't ask where I went. I sat beside her. Close, but not touching. Do you still want this? I asked. She turned to me slowly. Do you? I want something real, I said. Something that doesn't feel like I'm living in someone else's story. Grace nodded. Then stay. But not because she broke you. Stay because you want to begin. I looked at her, and for the first time in days, I felt something like clarity. I'm not running, I said. Good, she whispered. Because I'm not chasing. And in that stillness, between regret and resolve, we chose each other again. Not as revenge, not as rebound, but as something new and terrifying and honest. Madison wasn't supposed to be back until Monday. At least, that's what she told me. But Sunday evening, just after 6 p.m., the front door opened, not Grace's, but ours, and I heard the unmistakable sound of heels on hardwood. I was in Grace's apartment, standing at her stove, stirring a pot of pasta, when we both froze. Then a knock. Not urgent, but deliberate, like someone who already had the upper hand. I moved toward the door slowly. Grace followed, silent, wide-eyed. When I opened it, Madison stood there, poised, unreadable, coat draped over one arm. Tyler, she said calmly. Dinner smells great. I didn't respond. She turned her eyes toward Grace, then back to me. May I come in? Grace stepped aside before I could say anything. It felt like a reflex, or maybe surrender. Madison walked in slowly, like she was inspecting a space she'd seen before in dreams. Her eyes scanned the room. The books I'd brought over, the extra toothbrush by the bathroom door, the framed photo Grace had set beside her record player. All evidence. All confessions without a word. She walked to the table and set her purse down, then turned. So, she said, this is where you live now. I cleared my throat. For now. She folded her arms. How domestic. Why are you here, Madison? I asked. She tilted her head. Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. Grace stepped forward. If you came here to punish him, don't bother. He's already been through enough. Oh, I'm not here for punishment, Madison replied. I'm here for honesty. Something we've all been short on. I moved between them slightly. This doesn't have to turn into a scene. It already is one, Madison said, laughing bitterly. 3 people. 2 betrayals. 1 giant mess. We may as well call it what it is. Grace's voice was steady. You checked out long before I ever touched him. Madison's eyes snapped to her. Don't pretend you're innocent. You moved in on him the second you saw a crack. No, Grace said, jaw tight. I picked up what you threw away. They stared at each other, the kind of silence that says everything fists never could. I raised a hand. Stop. Both of you. They looked at me. I didn't come here to be rescued. I came here because I didn't recognize the person you turned me into, Madison. I was loyal. I was patient. And I was invisible. Madison's face twitched. So you made yourself visible by screwing my best friend? No, I said. I made myself visible by not letting you rewrite the story. She stepped closer. You could have left like a man. Instead, you slithered upstairs. And you could have fought for me. I shot back. Instead, you dared me to leave. Grace stepped between us, hands raised. This isn't helping anyone. No, Madison said. But at least it's honest. The room fell quiet again. Madison looked around one more time, at the blankets folded over the armrest, the dishes in the sink, the traces of me spread across Grace's life. You love her? She asked, not softly, not painfully, just factually. I looked at Grace. Her eyes met mine. I don't know if it's love yet, I said, but it's real, and it's mine. Madison nodded, as if that was the final piece she needed. Then she turned to Grace. You can have him, but don't think this makes you better than me. I never said I was, Grace said, but I am here, and I won't apologize for that. Madison smiled, bitter and distant. Good. Then neither will I. She grabbed her purse, turned, and walked to the door. Just before stepping out, she paused. You know, she said without turning around, I used to picture our life together until we were old. Now I realize I was the only one imagining it. She left without slamming the door. Just silence again. Grace let out a breath and sat on the edge of the couch, eyes unfocused. I didn't expect her to come here, she said. Neither did I replied. She looked up at me. Do you regret any of it? I walked to her, sat beside her. I didn't rush my answer. I regret how it started. But not that it started. Her eyes closed. Me too. We sat in silence, the shadows of the evening stretching long across the floor. No fireworks. No dramatic kiss. Just the stillness that follows an ending, and maybe the whisper of something new. But the weight of it lingered. Not just the argument. Not just Madison's words. The truth of it all. This wasn't victory. This was fallout. And we were just beginning to feel the cold. It's been 3 weeks since the door closed behind Madison for the last time. She didn't come back. No texts. No calls. No threats of lawyers or drawn-out battles over dishes and furniture. Just silence. A mutual vanishing act, like we both realized the version of us we built was already a memory we didn't want to claim. The apartment feels hollow now. Not just the one I used to share with her, but Grace's too. There's a stillness in the building. The kind that echoes when you open cabinets. The kind that reminds you how loud absence can be. Grace and I haven't spoken much since that night. After Madison stormed out, something between us shifted. Not in anger, not in guilt, but in weight. Like the air was suddenly filled with everything we didn't say the moment after choosing each other out loud. For a few days, I stayed in Grace's apartment, but it felt too crowded with unspoken things. So I moved back downstairs. I didn't tell her I was going. Just packed my bag quietly and let the space between us stretch. She didn't come knocking. Neither did I. It's strange how quickly life becomes about maintenance when the chaos dies. I wake up. I drink black coffee. I check emails. I clean. I think about cooking and don't. I scroll through old texts and never hit send. The apartment looks like it used to. Neat, quiet, and personal. Except now, there's a dent in the couch cushion where Grace used to sit, a chipped mug I refuse to throw away, and a bottle of wine in the fridge I can't bring myself to open. The hardest part isn't missing Madison. I don't. It's missing the idea of who we were supposed to be. And maybe, missing the version of myself that once believed we'd get there. One afternoon, I find myself standing at the window, staring up toward the 3rd floor. Her blinds are closed. I haven't heard her music in days. Did we break each other? Or did we just get lost trying to be what the other needed? I don't know. All I know is that the building feels quieter than it should. And then, on a Monday morning, there's a knock at my door. I don't rush to open it. I don't brace myself. But when I swing it wide, there she is, Grace. Hair pulled back, hoodie draped over one shoulder, and 2 paper cups of coffee in her hands. She holds one out. Black, no sugar. You still drink it that way? I take it. Still do. We stand there in silence for a moment, the doorway between us like some border we're both afraid to cross. Then she smiles faintly. Neighbors again? I nod slowly. If you want. I'm not here to pick up where we left off, she says. I just didn't want the last thing between us to be silence. I'm glad it's not, I say. She shifts on her feet. Madison moved out of state. Got a job offer in Denver. You two still talking? No, she says. Not really. I think we both knew whatever thread was left wasn't worth pulling on. I take a sip of the coffee. It's still warm. Familiar. I've been thinking a lot, I tell her. So have I. I lean against the doorframe. We got caught in something big. Something neither of us started, but both of us finished. She nods. I keep wondering if we were the mistake or the answer. Maybe both. Maybe neither. We look at each other for a long moment. There's no fire behind it. No urgency. Just something softer. A quiet understanding built on the wreckage of something else. I'm not asking for anything, she says. No expectations. Neither am I. But if you ever want to talk, or sit on the steps and drink bad coffee, or listen to records without saying much, I'm upstairs. I smile. I think I'd like that. She steps back, one hand wrapped around her coffee. Okay, then I'll see you around. Grace, I say before she turns. She looks back. Thank you. For showing up, even when I didn't know I needed you to. Her eyes soften. Thank you for letting me. And then she's gone. Not like Madison was. Not like someone disappearing, but like someone who might come back. I close the door and stand in the center of my apartment, the coffee still warm in my hand. Maybe this isn't about starting over. Maybe it's just about starting from here. Some endings are soft. Some endings don't feel like endings at all. Just a quiet knock. A cup of coffee. And the space between 2 lives waiting to begin again.